Okay, hello everyone. So for this video, I'll be showing you guys how to do the paper mache. Now originally it was going to be made out of foam, but foam didn't prove to be a good material, especially when it came to gluing. And also when sanding down the foam, it just wouldn't budge and it wouldn't create as smooth of a mountain as I wanted. So that's why I've reverted back to using paper mache. Now, what you're gonna need for this is just some simple white some white liquid glue that you have. This is just the standard stuff, nothing too crazy. Something with water in it. You don't need too much. You won't be coating the newspaper extremely, but a good amount will suffice. Tape and newspaper. Now, for this demonstration here, I'm only going to be doing a really small structure compared to the thing that's actually on the model. This is simply for showing you how to do it. So the first step is mixing the actual liquid glue that we're going to be using. So normally it recommends that you use about 1 part glue to 2 parts water, but I prefer doing this simply by eye. And to do this by eye, you just really want to make sure that you're achieving a mix that is viscous enough, but not crazy and liquidy. This, for example, is way too viscous. As you can see, the water rises to the top and it's not a uniform mixture. Which means that not only has it not been mixed thoroughly, but it's too watery. That's not gonna work for anything. So it is much better to add more glue here at this stage. You'll start knowing that you have a proper amount when it starts putting up much more resistance. Like I said, this is just way too much water. As you can see, it's just way too liquidy. It's not going to hold up. In fact, I might just add this whole thing here. Let's see this. I think this will be enough. And remember, you always want to mix it because the top is going to just have the water lying on it. And clearly that's not what you want. I think a little bit more is needed, and you're almost there. Okay, let's try this much. Okay, I think that's about enough. It just needs a little more mixing. So as you can see here, it's still liquidy, but it's mainly sort of gluey and still adhesive. If it's too watery and you dip in your newspaper, it's just going to turn to water. It's not going to stick, and more importantly, when it dries, it won't properly harden up as you want it to. So if you actually dip the stick in, you can see that it gets coated pretty well by the glue. So that's around what you want. One thing I'm going to do first is clean off the stain that's on the table. Okay, let's begin. So, what you're first going to want to do is make the main structure, and you're going to try to put it, where you want. So, for this structure, I'm just going to make a small hill. And what you're going to do is, using the newspaper, you're going to start crumbling up and making balls. And what the balls are going to do is they're going to act as the main structure, and then you're going to add the strips of paper mache on top to actually make it stick. So let's start with this ball here, and just using tape, you're going to tape it down. It's a little rough, but just keep building up the structure. Now, one thing I can recommend here is that I'm actually technically using the wrong type of tape. For this, you normally actually want to be using this sort of paper tape. Now the thing with the paper tape is that the paper tape, obviously being sort of more, being paper and not this sort of plastic, it means that when you put the paper mache strips on it, it won't just simply reflect them off. So plastic is, you know, a hydrophobic substance, so when you put the actual sort of glue material on it, right, so the newspaper dipped in glue, it might not stick properly. And what that means is that when the drying process comes about, it might not dry like I said, properly, right? It won't fully dry, it'll slip off. And that's not something you want. So ideally you'd want to use the white style tape rather than this one. But since this is what I have on hand, it's what will need to be used. Now if you'll take attention to the sort of structure I'm building, you really want to make sure that the paper is packed. If the paper isn't packed and it's going to expand later on, obviously if you put paper mache on top of it when it's wet and then the paper begins to sort of open up a little bit after you've shriveled it up, then it's just going to push it off and it's not going to make the structure you want. So it's really key that you try to scrunch it up as much as possible to get the desired shape. So like I said, just scrunch it like that. And another thing you could do is just push it on like the other ones to make a more sort of smooth hill. Because obviously your hill is not going to be made up of a bunch of spheres that have sort of just been glued together. That's clearly not the objective here, so. Okay, if I could get the tape to go. This is another good reason to use the paper tape. The tape here really is just used to keep the structure in place. You don't want it to move obviously as you're putting it, you know, with its paper mache, because obviously that's not going to work. So it's really ideal that you use the tape strategically to try to make sure nothing moves here. I'd say that this is actually a little too flimsy and is moving a little bit too much. And remember, just keep adding until you have a shape that you like, and that shape will then be covered up. Here's another thing: you can have small holes and small areas that aren't fully, full of the newspaper itself. The reason why is because the newspaper doesn't specifically need to be always touching the paper mache. Paper mache can be its own material, so it doesn't really need to be touching. If you have small gaps like that, then it's completely fine. Obviously, it's slightly better if you don't have them, since it'll sort of adhere more. But if you do, that's completely fine. Here's the problem with the tape. Okay, I can get this to work. Okay, and once again, remember, the tape is here for structure, so use it as such, not like that. I'd say that once I tape down the small side there, we're good to go. Okay, scrunch it up one more time. Okay, so that will be our rough hill. And as you can see, it doesn't really look too much like a hill now, but it sure will before. So, once you're at this stage, once you have the shape that you want, you're going to begin with the actual paper mache. So, for the actual paper mache, obviously you're going to need your newspaper. And for the newspaper, what's ideal for it is that you have as small strips as possible and that you make multiple layers once the first one is dried. So the real process you want to do is you want to get a piece, you want to dip it in, you want to coat it fully, not too crazily, and I've lost it. Forget about that. Do another strip here. So dip it in, and then you just want to take off a little bit of the material off. You don't want it to be too wet. If it's too wet, it'll basically make a mess and it won't be really good. So just keep layering these strips on. You can also dip a little bit and then just use your fingers to spread it about. I'd say that the strips I'm making here are slightly too big and a little bit too wet also, because I'm not sure if you can really tell.